And I'm a bit like you. Anybody who contacts me and says, "Will you come on this radio show? Will you come on this podcast?" The answer, I think, has always been 100% yes, of course, because I want to talk to people. I actually want to talk to people as well who disagree with me because I don't want an echo chamber. I want people to hear my point of view and for them to be able to critique it and maybe even show me where I'm going wrong because I'm not on this journey to be proven right. I'm on this journey for knowledge and the truth. And if people can help me find knowledge and truth, then I would appreciate it off anybody.
Yeah, I think that's actually an issue we live in today. It's just a one big echo chamber. People see an opinion and then they just repeat it without actually doing any of their own research. So they think it's true. And then when you question them, they get all agitated and they start screaming and shouting. So
Well, we've seen that recently when you ask anybody, what's a woman? And it's like, how dare you ask me this question? How dare you? And it's like, it's one of the most simplest questions you can ask somebody. Like, what is a cat? What is a dog? What is a man? What is a woman?
if you spoke to people 50, 60 years ago and you said to them, these are the questions we would be asking, I think they'd be in shock, to be fair.
They would. They would. Right. My first question, or my first discussion point I wanted to talk about was I'm 54. You're in your early 20s. Has the world always been mental in your lifetime? Because I remember the time when the world wasn't mental.
I don't personally remember a time when it wasn't mental. I think, sorry about that. It's when you develop your own opinion, you then see how mental the time or the times you've been living in. And I sort of call it, I've said it in a video before, it's like a Santa Claus syndrome. You know, when you're young and you're brought up with this idea that Santa Claus exists, and then you see your mum wrapping the presents or something, you can never go back to believing in Santa Claus. And if you do, you're just denying reality. And that was the situation for me. You see what's really going on and you realize we've been in that time or it's been progressing into that time for a long, long time. You just don't know it because I feel like in this country, especially the UK, we're brought up in a more left-leaning way as people don't want to admit, but I just think we are. So to have different opinions isn't really a known thing. And when you do have a different opinion, people just shout at you, you're right wing, etc., etc. That's what I experience and have experienced in my life. And I'm only young and you're a lot older than me. So, I can't imagine what you've gone through with having different political opinions on certain things.
Yeah, I think for me the world changed, or our country changed after the Second World War. By the end of the Second World War, the British Empire was gone. We went from a world power to bankrupt. We had to have loans off America. You know that the money we borrowed off America to save us in the war and after the war, we only finished paying back something like 10 years ago. That's how long it took us to get out of debt for the war years.
I think I actually remember that being mentioned when I was younger, to be fair. That just rings a bell.
Yeah, so that's how much we had to borrow to save the country. And then since the 50s onwards, we've had this left-wing progressivism. I'm writing a book at the moment about feminism, and I put the blame, most of the blame of this wokeness and the issues we have today, I put it all at the feet of feminism. And my book will probably come out end of the year, and I explain how that happens. But as a younger person, and life has always, since you've woken up from the matrix, you've seen that the world's mental. I put a lot of, again, you won't know this because of your age, as in, I remember a time pre-social media, pre the internet. So all these ideas have been here for a long time,
Oh, really?
but social media and the internet has sped it all up. It's allowed crazy people from different corners of the world to start sharing these mental ideas and them to, in an echo chamber, think, well, they believe this and so do I. And I've just read this article online that they never would have found if it wasn't for the internet. And it's been like this validation circle being online. And I think that's a major part of the problem.
I definitely agree. I think there is an issue today where people just want to mean something in society, whatever that may be. And I feel like progressive movements are an easier route into that. People are told their life gets better once you join these sort of movements. And we live in an attention economy, basically, where people thrive and live off attention. So if they can get easy attention by saying certain things, changing genders, changing their pronouns, etc., then they will do it. And if you question that, you're the bad one, you're the evil one, which doesn't really make any sense to me. Because once a lot of them leave an echo chamber, once they leave it, I think they realize the world isn't how they see it. Because I don't think the world really cares about the stuff they believe in. They think it does, but in reality, I don't think it does. So you're setting people up for a harsh reality that the world will give them, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the world's a very harsh, unfair place. It always has been and it always will be. And if you cocoon yourself with these ideas, these platitudes, these memes that we can all be pink and fluffy, we can all sing Kumbaya and we can all get along, then you're in for a big shock once reality smashes you in the face. And if you have a country like that, that country is wide open for invasion, of being wiped off the face of the earth. And it goes back to that old saying, strong men create good times create weak men create bad times. And I think where we're on that cycle, I'm sure it's towards the end somewhere, but I'm not sure exactly where we are. But bad times are coming.
I think we're in the bad times. You see what's going on in the world, cost of living, etc., etc. I think there is a problem with masculinity being stifled out of men, especially at a young age, especially in school. The education system, I think, is really designed for girls and women, and it hinders boys, because in school, if they shout too loud, they say something the teacher doesn't like, they get told to be quiet, sit down, and sent outside the classroom. So when you breed a feminine society, this is the result of it. Boys want to be more feminine. They don't stand up for anything, and then they allow everything. Like in different countries, they're protesting everywhere. France protests every day. We have situations going on in our country and nobody does anything. Why is that? I still don't get it, because like I don't understand how many times people need to get screwed over by people before they realize they don't have your best interests at heart. And I think if men were more masculine and stood for things as they did 50, 60 years ago, I think maybe we wouldn't be in this situation as much.
I completely agree. I don't think we would. I'm not sure protests and demonstrations work. They don't work in France, really. It gets press attention, but it gives the outcry. I think we're a lot more reserved in this country, which I'm not saying is a good thing or a bad thing. Um, but you're right. I keep telling people all the time, we live in a democracy. And if our politicians are making the wrong choices and are ruining the country, which they are, because it's always about short termism, no one's ever planning for the future. It's always about how can I get elected in 3 years' time. But we live in a democracy, and the ultimate people to blame if you have a government doing the wrong things is called us. We need to take some responsibility ourselves as the electorate, and we need to start looking about how we can get rid of the politicians we don't like. And just because we don't like them, that doesn't mean they're the wrong politicians, because we may be a minority of one or a minority of 100 or 5,000. It doesn't matter. We're still a minority. So it's about looking at our system and using the system we have to make the change we want. That's how we got Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, from a young person's point of view, when Brexit happened, it was the most racist thing that ever happened, right? But I actually think now, if it was done properly, it would have been a good thing, because they made all these promises about immigration, etc., the NHS, and none of them have been delivered. I would actually argue we're in a worse position now than we were before Brexit. I don't know, maybe if that's controversial to say.
I would agree with you. We are in a worse position, but I don't think it's got anything to do with Brexit. It's to do with we'd still be in the same situation now, because this is a world thing going through. The promises about Brexit, the promises to the NHS were kept. The NHS got all that money and has got even more money than it was getting before Brexit. The immigration is where, I mean, I can't believe it's a Tory government have really let the side down, because we still don't control our borders. We're still part of the European Court of Human Rights. We're in a worse position, as in we're not part of Europe anymore, but we're still being partly run by Europe. It's the worst of both worlds. And again, that comes down to our politicians who we vote in.
And then I would argue, if these issues weren't here, which the politicians indirectly or directly create, would we need politicians in the first place? Because I think we've placed this, I don't know, this attachment to these politicians that they're going to save us. Someone's going to come in and save everybody, when I feel like these politicians create the issues, so we think we need saving.
To a certain extent, but humans are a tribal creature. And as a tribal creature, we need tribal leaders, and that's why we invented gods. That's why we invent things like pop stars and celebrities, because as a human, we're always looking, we want to look up to something else, something to copy, something to imitate. So politicians are the modern version of kings, modern versions of tribal leaders and of gods. But they need to be more accountable, and they're not. And the reason why they're not held accountable is because the vast majority of people are sheep. Vast majority of people will go along with whatever seems to be the fashionable thing of the time, the thing that's going to keep them safe, and they're not going to put their head above the parapet. Hence why we go through these phases, right-wing phases, left-wing phases, because people will just follow what they think is the winning ideology at the time.
I don't think people, especially my age, I don't think they really care at the minute. I don't think they really care till they reach in their 30s, 40s. Even now, I still don't think people care because we're plagued by all of these distractions, whether it's TV shows, even sports, social media, they're all distractions. And I feel like they're purposely there to distract people, because if people weren't as distracted as they are now, maybe certain people would wake up to certain things that are going on. And these last 2 years have proven if they can get away with what they've done, they can get away with absolutely anything.
Yeah, I mean, and this has been documented in history. If you look at the Roman Empire in Rome, it was called the circus, it was called the games. That's why the emperors would spend so much money on the games, because it was distraction for the people. And what they didn't want was the people talking to each other and going, my life's crap. Well, you're not doing that when you're shouting for your teams and you're watching gladiators kill each other. It's exciting for the day. So those distractions are true. You know, clever politicians will distract you. And if you look at throughout history with dictators, almost every country run by a dictator is at war with somebody, because a dictator wants their populace looking at an outside enemy. Because if they're not looking outside, they're looking internal, and the enemy internal is a dictator. So leaders are always having these distractions, creating these distractions to keep their populace under control.
And with the situation with wars, I feel like we're always told a war is going on. And I'm pretty sure George Orwell put that in his book. I think when we're told there always has to be a war going on, because we always have to feel like we're in impending doom and we have to live in a state of fear.
Climate change, that's the West's war at the moment.
Climate change, it's a funny one because the people, I mean, I wouldn't sit here and say I don't believe in it, or I do. I just question how it's being used and how it will be used in the future. But you say to people now, I'll go downstairs to my family, like, oh, I don't believe in it. They're like, what? You don't believe in climate change? And I feel like the more we try and scare people with that, like I saw a American politician, I can't remember her name, but her son woke up with a nightmare because of climate change. And parents are telling their kids all about this stuff. Like that person must have told their son how dangerous this thing is going to be, when really I don't think any of us will notice any changes in our lifetime.
I don't think we'll. I mean, climate change is real, as in the climate's changing. But,
Oh yeah, for sure.
But the climate's never stopped changing. That's why we have polar bears. Polar bears used to be brown bears, but they adapted over time because the climate changed. You look at the history, the geological history of the world. It's all changed because of climate. It's changing all the time. The two questions really are: is man contributing more to it now? So that's a valid question to ask. And the second one is there anything man can do to stop the planet's climate from changing? The answer to that is absolutely nothing we can do. We are insignificant on this planet. We cannot change what the planet does. But if we can reduce pollution, then everyone's up for reducing pollution and keeping the environment, healthier, friendlier, greener. So there's things we can do which everybody agrees with. It's when the lunatics take over and start saying we've got 2 years, and then we've got 2 years left to save 8 billion people. It's a climate emergency. People are dying. Ecosystems are failing. And when you ask them where, they can't tell you anything, point to anything. And it's become an ideology. It's become a replacement for religion. This is the end of times. This is the book of Revelations. This is, if I'm a good person, when the world ends, I'm going to heaven. It's just a new version of that.
The world is always going to heat up. I saw a podcast where the world has always gone in cycles. It heats up, it cools down, etc., etc. I just think climate change is going to be used to further control people's freedoms, as we saw in the last 2, 3 years, how our freedoms were wiped away overnight with an announcement. And I feel like that will be used as well. I mean, you've already got taxes for certain emissions coming in certain places. Electric cars being pushed heavy. I'd have nothing against them. It's just how will they also be used to control people? You know, I feel like all of these things that we're supposed to be worried about are just there to take our freedoms away. And if we're scared, we allow these people to take the freedoms because we think it's for our safety.
Yeah. There was a British politician in the 70s called Tony Benn. He was a Labour politician, very, very clever man. Socialist, but a very clever man. And I was watching an interview on YouTube obviously from the 70s for him, and he said something that just jumped out at me. And so again, this is the 70s. He said, if you want to control the population, keep them afraid and make them stupid. And it's like,
We are living in those times now.
someone took that advice from the 70s and have been working on this since, because we are afraid now and we are stupid. Our education system's terrible.